Okay, next question. What does a full and complete recovery even look like? So again, when folks find me, most of the time, you guys are hurting so bad that the idea of a complete recovery is kind of so far away that it seems improbable. And um, there is this question of what would that look like? And so I'm going to try and answer that for you. All right. So how do we go about this? So the way I go about it is following what's called the IFP system and process. IFP, Integrated Functional Performance. Okay, that might sound like a lot of big words, but it's very descriptive, and you'll get to understand that as we go through these simple parts. There's very simple parts to this system. The first part is the unload. All right, the unload, you could call it a quick relief strategy, right? So when folks find me, they've been doing this and that and the other, and the real thing that seems to be missing is just some ability to find reliable relief. And so my target is always to find that within the first 7 days and have you feeling better within that first 7 days. A lot of times it's within the first 2 or 3 days. So actually most of the time it's within the first 2 or 3 days. We find this quick relief strategy. One of my clients called it an off button for the pain she was suffering. And so having an off button, you can imagine, can really free up your day. So honestly, I've had people, this was all they wanted. All they wanted was this off button, and they'd go about their business and they'd use their off button again, and they kind of went about things that way. That was fine for them. What does the off button do? Sorry, the unload. The unload, actually what we're doing is we're eliminating the threat. And when I say threat, I mean what your brain is perceiving in your body. So you can imagine if I had a burn on my arm, I wouldn't want to be pressing on it, scraping on it, pushing on it. I'd probably not like to be doing a lot of work with it right now. I'd like to unload that tissue and give it a chance to breathe and recover a little bit. So in your body, especially your nerves, when a nerve is threatened, either through one of several mechanisms, your brain perceives that threat as something to care for. And so tension shows up, pain shows up. All of these reactions that show up are really meant by your brain to care for you. Well, the beautiful thing is that there is very solid evidence, science, decades old of research that shows us how to unload that tissue, the nerve, various spots, to be very specific about it, so that we can not only unload your pain, but we can understand where it's coming from, really, without having to look through any imaging or any other scans. We can actually identify that and unload that threat. Once we unload the threat, now your brain's ready to go. It says, now some of these strategies that people tend to use, like strengthening and stretching and things like that aren't working because the nerve is consistently under threat, they start to be able to work again. Now, I do have a different approach to that, though, because again, I feel like the standard approach doesn't really meet the need. And so, and that's through experience for myself. I've suffered numerous disc and nerve injuries in my life through competition and otherwise. And it's also through working with clients for 3 decades plus. So this next step is called the rebuild. And the simple way to think about the rebuild is it's rewiring your body for your new reality. So you may have some structural issue that just can't really be recovered. But you've had some trauma for sure. And trauma, what we know about trauma is that trauma doesn't, you don't wipe it away, you integrate it. And so you integrate it by rewiring. And I can get into detail on that, but I'm going to get into small, just the basic view of this rebuild. So this rebuild, The goal is to get the little muscles that are close to the joint that's been affected, close to the bony area that's been affected. So it may not be the bones that have been affected, but the joint area. There's little muscles that kind of position the bones for movement. So they actually trigger before you do stuff. So when I go to turn my head, if I'm functioning well, there's little muscles that kind of start to create tension and that relax to prepare the vertebra, the bones of my neck, to be in the right spot when I move. And then these big muscles, these macro system of muscles, actually cause the movement. And when we have those things working together, we have what's called function, right? So this is the integrated functional performance. So function is that things are working in a way that fits the reality of what's going on. And when I say rewiring your body for your new reality, what I mean is after this trauma, after this issue that you've suffered, your brain needs to, in a sense, see things more clearly and create a better strategy for movement. And there's ways to help your brain do that. And your brain will figure out a better way than you or I ever could. So we'll let it do it. And we do that through the rebuild strategy. So again, unload, rebuild. A lot of people feel like this is all they need, right? So if we talked about if you saw the video on the 4 phases, we had the acute phase where the pain is pressing. So if we do an unload, you're already moving yourself out of the acute phase. And then we said that the next phase is the critical phase. Well, the critical phase of recovery is where you're very vulnerable and you feel vulnerable and you can know it, and you may slip into pain over and over again. Well, with a rebuild, you start to become durable and you stop slipping into pain so easily. You start to be able to do things again. So what we do after that, if you want to continue forward, is we get into what's called a reset. Now, these things kind of all blend together. We don't just do the unload and then wait, and then start the rebuild. Those two things go hand in hand to help you recover. Likewise, the rebuild and the unload start to blend into a thing called the reset. And the reset's all about getting things working together properly again, systemically through your whole body. And so one of the things is what's called central nervous system integration. Now, these are all big words, and you don't need to know them. I've already learned them. And what I've done is I've taken these big words and I've turned them into very, very simple processes to help you get benefit, okay? But when we're talking about central nervous system integration, you got to understand there's 2 sides to your brain. So central nervous system is your brain and your spinal cord. And there's 2 sides to your brain. And if they're not integrating well, we got problems. You can actually have a higher experience of pain, a higher experience of injury, a higher experience of stress on your body if these 2 sides aren't integrated well. Likewise, we have sort of an upstairs and downstairs. And when I was talking about the perception of threat, especially how nerves can create threat in the body, that triggers that downstairs, and that downstairs takes over and it begins to disintegrate the rest of the function of the brain. So we need to reset that. And luckily, there's some very simple processes that show great evidence for being able to do that. Now, muscles, we have to reset the muscles. So muscles, we can talk about working muscles in isolation, where we try and access one muscle. But the reality is that movement requires integration. It requires what's called a synergistic action of muscles. So my bicep and my deltoid, my muscle on the front of my arm and the front of my shoulder actually work together for lots of different actions. And if they're not working together well, I need to help them do that. Wonderfully, there's simple processes to do that. Nervous system. So we already mentioned the central nervous system integration and how it contributes to better processing. So you think more clearly, you have a higher experience, a higher threshold for stress or for pain. You can move more comfortably. There's so many benefits to having an integrated central nervous system, but the peripheral nervous system also is important. And when we're talking about the peripheral nervous system, we're talking about the nerves as they exit the spine and they go out and they tell your arms and legs and everything else what to do. And especially after trauma, after injury, we can have what amount to little two-lane highways, okay, where very little communication can travel back and forth, and it slows you down. It slows down your ability to recover, slows down your ability to move, it slows down your ability to adapt or get results. And what we want to do is to turn those two-lane highways into superhighways. I've already mentioned how central nervous system disintegration can leave us in a state of higher stress. And so when we talk about that in the body, we go to the nerves that go out into the body, and that's the parasympathetic and sympathetic systems of nerves in the body. If you know about this, great. If you don't worry about it. There's no quiz. I know about it, and so I can help you with it. Parasympathetic basically means rest, digest, recover. It's your body's ability to harness your potential for being able to recover the fastest. Now, sympathetic is harnessing the potential of your body to perform at its highest level, to do all the things you want to do at the level you want to do them. And there's this lie that says that these two systems have to be in balance. The reality is that it's more of like a pendulum effect. We're either going to swing deeply into parasympathetic and maximize our resources for recovery, or we're going to swing deeply into sympathetic and maximize our resources for performance. The really interesting thing is, if we don't recover well, our brain automatically stops us from performing well. It knows that if you push too hard or get going too far, that you can't recover. So it starts to regulate you. And this pendulum, this broad pendulum, starts to collapse. And as it collapses, so does your health. And so we want a very broad pendulum. And so that's how we get that's not how, but I'll show you how you make that happen. Again, super simple steps, complicated concepts, movement. Okay, so we already talked about movement, but I'm going to get back at it again. We said something about a synergistic effect between muscles working together. So in the body, we've sort of identified what are called subsystems of muscles. So there's several muscles linked together that tend to benefit movement at a high level. And if these subsystems are functioning well, you tend to move well. Okay, and how do we move? We move based on patterns. So patterns are how your brain recruits these subsystems. So if we have a disintegrated system, then you're not recruiting these subsystems well. And movement is going to feel awkward and uncomfortable, and maybe even painful. If we can reestablish these patterns, then these subsystems work together well, and you start feeling better. So that all happens inside this reset. And so I put a little note down there, micro, macro integration or nothing. So if we don't have that rebuild underlying all of this stuff, if we haven't done this rebuild process of getting those little muscles that are close to the joint working with the bigger muscles that move the joints, then we really can't get a good reset. So you can see how these things have to flow together. It's very systematic. This process is very systematic. It's very reliable. It is very much based in principles of movement, but also principles of full and complete recovery, which is what you're looking for. Okay, one last one here. This is a long one, but this last one will be short. Recondition. Okay, so we had unload, rebuild, reset, and then there's recondition. Okay, so and when we were talking about the 4 phases of recovery, we had the acute phase where the pain is pressing, the critical phase where you're very vulnerable, the functional phase where you start to be really durable again, and you start to be able to do the things you want to do the way you want to do them, unless you want to move on to specialized, which is where you have some big adventure that you want to explore, and it takes more from your body than just regular function. So that's where we get into reconditioning, and it's a super simple process for this. First one is we pick the pattern, the movement pattern that's going to serve you best for what it is you want to accomplish. There's not a million things to do. Again, this stays very simple, and I will tell you that one of the things that I've just found great joy in all my life is helping people get what are called PRs, personal records. And I can do so very reliably by picking the right pattern and then grilling the pattern. So then we really work that pattern so it becomes a very durable, reactive, resilient pattern, and then rinse and repeat. So maybe we need to maybe we decide we're going to add a pattern, or maybe we're just going to find new levels of that one pattern of movement so that you can achieve at these higher levels involved in that specialized phase. Hey, this is a long one. If you stuck with it, great. If you didn't, it's okay. You won't hear this anyway, but I take care of all this for you. You don't really need to know any of this, but if you find this helpful to understand, I'm so glad that you watched.